Hello everyone and welcome to this latest episode of Book Time with Elvis with me, Mark, and welcome back to another installment of my fantastic look at a collection of modern essays edited by Sir Christopher Morley, which I'm sure you're enjoying after the last one we did. So I've chosen this one because I'm particularly interested in history, and the name of this essay is Some Historians, and it's by Philip Guedalla. And as I say, it comes from Sir Christopher Morley's collection of modern essays published in 1921. And as usual, I'm going to leave Morley himself to introduce the author to you in his preamble to the essay. So Philip Guedalla was born in 1889. He is a London barrister, so obviously he's still alive at the time of the time this book came out. He is a London barrister and at present time an independent Liberal candidate for the House of Commons. He has written excellent light verse and parodies and a textbook on European history 1715 to 1815. His most conspicuous achievement so far is the brilliant volume Supers and Supermen, from which my selection is taken. Supers and Supermen is a collection of historical and political portraits and skits. It is mercilessly and gloriously humorous. Those who can always follow the wit and irony that Gudala knows how to conceal in a cunningly turned phrase will find the book a prodigious delight. He has an unerring eye for the absurd. His paradoxes, when pondered, have a way of proving excellent truth. Truth is sometimes like the furniture in Through the Looking Glass, which could only be reached by resolutely walking away from it. 10 years ago, Mr. Gudala was considered the most continuously and insolently brilliant undergraduate of the Oxford of that day. The charm and vigour of his ironical wit have not lessened since his fellow undergraduates strove to convince themselves that no man could be as clever as P.G. seemed to be. When Mr. Gudala holds the mirror up to Nietzsche, or gives thanks that Britons never will be Slavs, or dynasticises Henry James into 3 reigns, James I, James II, and the Old Pretender, or when he speaks of the cheerful clatter of Sir James Barry's cans as he went round with the milk of human kindness, there will be some who will sigh, but there will also, I hope, be many who will forgive the bravado for the quicksilver wit. So there we go. And here we go. It was Quintilian, or Mr. Max Beerbohm, who said, "History repeats itself, historians repeat each other. The saying is full of the mellow wisdom of either writer, and stamped with the peculiar veracity of the silver age of Roman or British epigram." One might have added, if the aphorism had stayed for an answer, that history is rather interesting when it repeats itself. Historians are not. In France, which is an enlightened country enjoying the benefits of revolution and a public examination in rhetoric, historians are expected to write in a single and classical style of French. The result is sometimes a rather irritating uniformity. It is one long tame that has no turning, and any quotation may be attributed with safety to Guizot because la nuit tous les chats sont gris. But in England, which is a free country, the restrictions natural to ignorant and immoral foreigners are put off by the rough island race, and history is written in a dialect which is not curable by education and cannot, it would seem, be prevented by injunction. Historians' English is not a style, it is an industrial disease. The thing is probably scheduled in the Workmen's Compensation Act, and the publisher may be required upon notice of the attack to make a suitable payment to the writer's dependents. The workers in this dangerous trade are required to adopt, like Mahomet's coffin, a detached standpoint, that is, to write as if they took no interest in the subject. Since it is not considered good form for a graduate of less than 60 years' standing to write upon any period that is either familiar or interesting, this feeling is easily acquired, and the resulting narrations present the dreary impartiality of the recording angel without the completeness which is the sole attraction of his style. Wilde complained of Mr. Hall Caine that he wrote at the top of his voice, but a modern historian, when he is really detached, writes like someone talking in the next room, and few writers have equalled the legal precision of Cox's observation that the Turks sawed the Archbishop and the commandment in half and committed other grave violations of international law. Having purged his mind of all unsteadying interest in the subject, the young historian should adopt a moral code of more than a Malthusian severity, which may be learned from any American writer of the last century upon the Renaissance or the decadence of Spain. This manner, which is especially necessary in passages dealing with character, will lend to his work the grave dignity that is requisite for translation into Latin prose, that supreme test of an historian's style. It will be his misfortune to meet upon the byways of history the oddest and most abnormal persons, and he should keep by him, unless he wishes to forfeit his fellowship, some convenient formula by which he may indicate at once the enormity of the subject and the disapproval of the writer. The writings of Lord Macaulay will furnish him at need with the necessary facility in lightning characterization. It was the practice of Cicero to label his contemporaries without distinction as heavy men, and the characters of history are easily divisible into far-seeing statesmen and reckless libertines. It may be objected that although it is sufficient for the purposes of contemporary caricature to represent Mr. Gladstone as a collar or Mr. Chamberlain as an eyeglass, it is an inadequate record for posterity. But it is impossible for a busy man to write history without formulae, and after all, sheep are sheep and goats are goats. Lord Macaulay once wrote of someone, "In private life he was stern, morose, and inexorable." He was probably a Dutchman. It is a passage which has served as a lasting model for the historian's treatment of character. I had always imagined that Clichy was a suburb of Paris until I discovered it to be a street in Oxford. Thus, if the working historian is faced with a period of deplorable excesses, he handles it like a man and writes always as if he were illustrated with steel engravings. The imbecile king now ripened rapidly towards a crisis. Surrounded by a court in which the inanity of the day was rivaled only by the debauchery of the night, he became incapable towards the year 1472 of distinguishing good from evil, a fact which contributed considerably to the effectiveness of his foreign policy, but was hardly calculated to conform with the monastic traditions of his house. Long nights of drink and dicing weakened a constitution that was already undermined, and the council table where once Campo Santa had presided was disfigured with the despicable apparatus of Bajatelli. The burghers of the capital were horrified by the wild laughter of his madcap courtiers, and when it was reported in London that Ladislas had played at Halma the court of St. James, received his envoy in the deepest of ceremonial mourning. That is precisely how it is done. The passage exhibits the benign and contemporary influences of Lord Macaulay and Mr. Baudelaire, and it contains all the necessary ingredients, except perhaps a venal chancellor and a greedy mistress. Vice is a subject of especial interest to historians, who are in most cases residents in small county towns, and there is unbounded truth in the rococo footnote of a writer on the Renaissance, who said, apropos of a pope, the disgusting details of his vices smack somewhat of the morbid historian's lamp. The note itself is a fine example of that concrete visualization of the subject which led Macaulay to observe that in consequence of Frederick's invasion of Silesia, black men fought on the coast of Coromandel, and red men scalped each other by the Great Lakes of North America. A less exciting branch of the historian's work is the reproduction of contemporary sayings and speeches. Thus, an obituary should always close on a note of regretful quotation. He lived in affluence and died in great pain. Thus it was said by the most eloquent of his contemporaries. Thus terminated a career as varied as it was eventful, as strange as it was unique. But for the longer efforts of sustained eloquence, greater art is required. It is no longer usual, as in Thucydides' day, to compose completely new speeches, but it is permissible for the historian to heighten the colours and even to insert those rhetorical questions and complexes of personal pronouns which will render the translation of the passage into Latin prose a work of consuming interest and lasting profit. The Duke assembled his companions for the forlorn hope and addressed them briefly in Oratio Obliqua. His father, he said, had always cherished in his heart the idea that he would one day return to his own people. Had he fallen in vain? Was it for nothing that they had died with their loyal blood the soil of 100 battlefields? The past was dead, the future was yet to come. Let them remember that great sacrifices were necessary for the attainment of great ends. Let them think of their homes and families, and if they had any pity for an exile, an outcast, and an orphan, let them die fighting. That is the kind of passage that used to send the blood of Dr. Bradley coursing more quickly through his veins. The march of its eloquence, the solemnity of its sentiment, and the rich balance of its pronouns unite to make it a model for all historians. It can be adapted for any period. It is not possible in a short review to include the special branches of the subject. Such are those efficient modern textbooks in which events are referred to either as factors, as if they were a sum, or as phases, as if they were the moon. There is also the solemn business of writing economic history, in which the historian may lapse at will into algebra, and anything not otherwise describable may be called social tissue. A special subject is constituted by the early conquests of Southern and Central America. In these there is a uniform opening for all passages running. It was now the middle of October, and the season was drawing to an end. Soon the mountains would be whitened with the snows of winter, and every rivulet swollen to a roaring torrent. Cortes, whose determination only increased with misfortune, decided to delay his march until the inclemency of the season abated. It was now the middle of November, and the season was drawing to an end. There is finally the method of military history. This may be patriotic, technical, or in the manner prophetically indicated by Virgil as belloc horrida belloc. The finest exponent of the patriotic style is undoubtedly the Reverend W.H. Fitchett, a distinguished colonial clergyman and historian of the Napoleonic Wars. His night attacks are more nocturnal, and his scaling parties are more heroically scaligerous than those of any other writer. His drummer boys are the most moving. In my limited circle of drummer boys, one gathers that the Peninsular War was full of pleasing incidents of this type. The night attack. It was midnight when Staff Surgeon Pettigrew showed the flare from the summit of Sombrero. At once the whole plain was alive with the hum of the great assault. The 4 columns speedily got into position with flares and bugles at the head of each. One made straight for the Watergate, a second for the Bailey Guard, a third for the Porterhouse, and the last, led by the saintly Smeeth, for the tube station. Let us follow the second column on its secret mission through the night, lit by torches and cheered on by the huzzas of 1,000 English throats. Something S, cried Cocker in a voice hoarse with patriotism. At that moment, a red-hot shot hurtled over the plain and, ricocheting treacherously from the frozen river, dashed the heroic leader to the ground. Captain Buffskin of the Buffs leapt up with the dry, coughing howl of the British infantryman. Something them, he roared, something them to something. I'm guessing like damn them to hell is probably what he's writing there. And for the last 50 yards, it was neck and neck with the ladders. Our gallant drummer boys laid to again, but suddenly a shot rang out from the silent ramparts. The 94th Leger were awake. We were discovered. The War of 1870 requires more special treatment. Its histories show no particular characteristic, but its appearance in fiction deserves special attention. There is a standard pattern. How the Prussians came to Gichy-le-Sec. It was a late afternoon in early September, or an early afternoon in late September, I forget these things, when I missed the boat express from Quai-Pleuanec to Pouzy-le-Roi, and was forced by the timetable to spend 3 hours at the forgotten hamlet of Gichy-le-Sec, in the heart of Dauphine. It contained, besides, a quantity of underfed poultry, 1 white church, 1 white mairie, and 9 white houses. An old man with a white beard came towards me with the long white road. It was on just such an afternoon as this, 40 years ago, he began that. "Stop," I said sharply. "I have met you in a previous existence. You are going to say that a solitary Ulan appeared sharply outlined against the sky behind Monsieur Jules's farm." He nodded feebly. The red trousers had left the village half an hour before to look for the hated Prussian in the cafes of the neighbouring town. You were alone when the spiked helmets marched in. You can hear their shrieking fifes to this day. He wept quietly. I went on. There was an officer with them, a proud, ugly man with a butter-coloured moustache. He saw the little Mimi and drove his course Subian hand upward through his Mecklenburger moustache, you dropped on one knee. But he had fled. In the first of 3 cafes, I saw a second old man. "Come in, monsieur," he said. I waited on the doorstep. It was on just such an afternoon. I went on. At the other 2 cafes, 2 further old men attempted me with the story. I told the last that he was rescued by the Zouaves and walked happily to the station to read about Vichy Celestines until the train came in from the south. The Russo-Japanese War is a more original subject and derives its particular flavour from the airy grace with which Sir Ian Hamilton has described it, like this. Wow wow, June 31st. The Rafale was purring like a Mistral as I shaved this morning. I wonder where it is. Must ask so-and-so. So-and-so is a charming fellow with the face of a Baluchi Kashgai and a voice like a circular saw. 11:40. It was 11:40 when I looked at my watch. The shrapnel bursts look like a plantation of powder puffs suspended in the sky. Victor says there is a battle going on. Capital chat, Victor. 2 p.m. Lunched with an American lady doctor. How feminine the Americans can be. 7 p.m. A great day. It was Donkelsdorp all over again. Substitute the 10th Army for the Traffordshire's baggage wagon. Swell honk Spruit into the roaring Wang Ho. Elevate Kop into the frowning scarp of Pyjama. Or Pyjama. And you have it. The staff were obviously gratified when I told them about Donkelsdorp. The Ruskies came over the crest line in a huddle of massed battalions, and Gazeka was after them like a rat after a terrier. I knew that his horse guns had no horses, a rule of the Japanese service to discourage unnecessary changing of ground, but his men bit the trails and dragged them up by their teeth. Slowly the Muscovites peeled off the steaming mountain and took the funicular down to the other side. I wonder what my friend Smuts would have made of the Yen Tai coal mine. Well, something accomplished, something done. The technical manner is more difficult of acquisition for the beginner, since it involves a knowledge of at least 2 European languages. It is a cardinal rule that all places should be described as points d'appui. The simple process of scouting looks far better than Verschleierung, and the adjective strategical may be used without any meaning in front of any noun. But the military manner was revolutionized by war. Mr. Belloc created a new land and a new water. We know why the Persian commanders demanded earth and water on their entrance into a Greek town. It was the weekly demand of the Great General Staff, as it was called for its favourite paper. Mr. Belloc has woven Baedeker and geometry into a new style. It is the last cry of historians, English, because one was invented by a German and the other by a Greek. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.